In this video, I'll be explaining how we can make our winter running more enjoyable and more effective for that great base training that we're all after. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Josh, a medical student currently studying a sports and exercise medicine degree while trying to train full-time for triathlon. On this channel, we talk triathlon training and productivity and medical student life to help you become a more able athlete and a more productive person. Nothing feels worse than the dread of running in poor weather. I cannot tell you the number of runs that I've abandoned, just not even gotten out the front door after looking out the window when I first woke up. And this especially becomes an issue in those winter months where bad weather, whether that's cold, rain, or even snow here in the UK, just becomes so much more common. But hopefully with the tips that we're going to talk about in this video, you won't have to give up on any of your runs over this winter period, and that means that your base training is going to be even better. We're going to maintain our fitness that we've made throughout the year, and we'll come into next year better than before and ready for a really hard training block straight out of the gate. And it also means that we get to do the sport that we love throughout the winter instead of having to give it up and settle for things that we don't necessarily enjoy as much. The first consideration when it comes to running in those winter months is going to be the time of day, and we'll break this down into two main parts. Firstly, we've got to think about the daylight that's going to be available. It can often be depressing getting up in the morning, being dark outside and spending the first few hours totally in the dark with no rays of sunshine to brighten our mood. And outside of our vitamin D levels and just general well-being, this can also affect when and how we run. Depending on where you live in the world, taking into account the amount of daylight is a serious consideration. If you live in a city, it might be okay to go out while it's still dark because there are street lights and shops and stuff that might be open, which will give you enough light to make sure you're both safe and that you know where you're going to be running. However, in the countryside, this becomes more of a problem though. Without things like street lights and clearly marked pavements that we can happily run along, it can be really dangerous for us if we can't see where we're placing our feet, or we can be in danger from road traffic if we're forced to go on the road. So taking into consideration how much daylight is really important, both for the safety and the quality of the run. And if you must go out when it's dark, I strongly recommend a boatload of reflective gear and a head torch minimum, as this will make you seen more easily, and using the head torch be able to see exactly where you're going, making your run more effective and safer. The other consideration when it comes to time of day is the temperature. Now, it's common sense that in the morning it's colder than it is in the late afternoon, but this is something that maybe doesn't quite click for a lot of runners, including myself. I can't tell you the number of times that I've worn my normal running gear, stepped outside first thing in the morning at 6:30 and gone, oh, it's far too cold, and then gone in and put more clothes on or simply not do the run. So by understanding what the temperature is likely to be earlier in the morning compared to in the afternoon, say when you're planning your run, can really help. And although it's nice to get out early and get workouts done, it might actually be better to wait until later in the day when it's warmer, as this can make it easier to go out, so we're more likely to do it. And also it means that your leg muscles aren't going to be as tight from the cold, and so you might actually perform a little bit better by going out later. It's just about finding a balance where you can be happy going out without it totally changing what would be your normal routine if you, like me, are someone who likes to run pretty much first thing in the morning. Personally, in the winter, I often swap out my morning slightly. So instead of exercising first thing in the morning, I do an hour or two of work and then go and exercise and have my breakfast after that. And this just puts exercise slightly later in the day, gives me a slightly more daylight and a little bit more warmth, which just makes it so much easier to do the runs that I've given myself. Arguably the biggest factor when it comes to how much we enjoy our winter runs has to be clothing and how that relates to the weather which we're likely to get. If you don't prepare well with your clothing, it can lead to genuine disaster and could be dangerous if you're stuck outside in the cold for too long. The single biggest factor when it comes to your clothing is layers, layers, layers. By layering up, we're able to keep the heat inside of us while being able to take layers off if we end up being too warm or the weather changes later on in the run, and we can always put those back on. It's the easiest way to make sure we're ready for whatever might lie ahead of us. So let's break down the kind of clothing that I would recommend, starting from the head and going all the way down to our toes. When it's sunny, I always run with a cap, and this definitely makes sense, but even in the winter, I'd still stick a cap on, or maybe even swap it out for a beanie. A cap during the winter can help to keep the rain out of your face if it is raining, and also locks in a little bit more heat than not wearing a cap. But if you're really concerned about temperature, then I would suggest something like a beanie, and you don't have to get a run specific one, just pick up a beanie, stick it on your head, and that will lock in so much more heat that will keep you warm throughout your run. In the same vein, a neck scarf or a snood might be really good if you live in an especially windy or cold place. However, living in the UK, I've never felt this to quite be necessary, as I get super warm on a relatively hard run. As we move down to the torso, we're going back to our base layers now, and they are so key in winter. Having one on under normal running top can give you an absolutely transformative experience, especially in the winter. If you haven't already, I would definitely invest in a good quality one, as it is useful for a lot of the year in the UK, as we have pretty terrible weather the whole time. And you can also use it for cycling if you so desire, and it can be something that you get a little bit more value out in that way. Now, for some reason, if you think that base layers aren't for you, the next best thing, in my opinion, is to go for leg or arm warmers. Now, these can be better when it isn't quite as cold, when you might need a base layer, but I found they don't provide as much warmth really in my core. But then again, the trade-off is they are easier to take off when you're running or cycling, and they're easier therefore to adjust your temperature as you go on. Lots of people love thermal leggings when it comes to running, and although I'm personally that one nutter who goes out in running shorts no matter what the weather is, I think that these are pretty necessary actually for the winter, unless you are a genuinely crazy person. So thermal leggings can really change that run, and they help to keep those leg muscles warm, which will make us actually perform better for the runs as well. And the final consideration for clothing is a rain jacket, and you really have two options here, either a hard shell or a soft shell. Now, the soft shell isn't a waterproof one, it's more of a felt material, something along those lines, and it will provide you with a lot of warmth, even more warmth than the hard shell, and it's another layer on top, and it can kind of stop water a bit. But if you live somewhere especially rainy like the UK, I would actually go with a hard shell. And this can be a little bit more difficult to judge because they don't let any water in, which is great, especially when it's raining, but they also don't let a lot of water out. And so if you find yourself on really hard runs where you're getting really sweaty, this might not be the best for you, and you actually might want to go without, or go with a soft shell for really hard runs. But like I said, this is down to personal choice, and it really depends on the weather you're expecting. In the same vein, the footwear that you choose to take out with you is incredibly important, both for your enjoyment and for your safety. I would avoid any slick shoes at all costs. Genuinely, anything that you wouldn't be happy wearing on some sort of wet grass, I wouldn't be going out with, simply because you're not going to get the grip that you need to be safe and perform well if you want to get any speed out of your runs. The more traction, the better. If you live in a place that has especially bad weather, I would even consider getting a light trail shoe, as this will give you so much more traction underfoot, and as long as you get a lighter pair, the weight gain isn't going to be significantly noticeable, especially when we're going on easier base miles. One of my favourites in that category is the Nike Pegasus Trail 2, but just kind of think of something that you'd be happily commuting in on the trail normally. So it would be both for clear roads and for snowy roads. And finally, before heading out the door in all the correct kit, think about the type of run you are planning to do. The winter months are often used for base training, which generally entails lots of boring, moderate miles, which definitely are not the most interesting or warming thing in the cold weather. Now, I'm not going to tell you not to do any base miles, because I really do believe in base training. I think it can be really good for your overall fitness. But in my opinion, I think it's really important to try and make them a little bit more interesting by adding a few minutes of speed and intensity, maybe up a local hill that you want to get a Strava segment for. And that'll just make you more excited to get out the front door and make the most of your training opportunities in the winter months. And that's it for this video. If you found this interesting or useful in any way, please consider subscribing to the channel, as we have many more videos just like this. And on screen now, there's going to be a link to my running playlist, which will give you loads of different videos for all the different aspects of your running training.